Okay, so I'm getting my screen set up because I will be doing some problems today. So I'm not sharing my video at the moment because we're going to get right into problems. We're going to be talking about domain and range. Domain and range are a way that we are going to actually be able to describe what's going on with our X's and our Y's. So I'm going to pop over to CP/M and look at a couple examples of domain and range and what I'm expecting for those values, and then we'll kind of work them out on here. So in this first one, it says on 152, it says examine the graph to the right. That's this graph right here. Use it to estimate y when x is -4. So if I look here, -4, -4. When x is -4, it looks like y is that value right there, which would be about -1, 2, 3, maybe like -3.7 might be my guess. Because this would be -4. It's not quite that low. So like maybe -3.7. That's what my estimate would be. It's asking you to now look when x is 1. Well, what is your y when x is 1? When x is 1, right here, I have a couple different values for my y. I have this value right here, which looks like it might be at -3. I have this value right here, which looks like it's at +1, 2, at +2. Remember from yesterday, when we have two outputs for the same input, this is not going to be a function. This is not going to be a function. We see it again when it asks for, when x is 4, we see that same concept again. Look at y could be about, let's say 3.2 or 0. There's another point. When x is 4, it could be 0. It could also be like this value right here, which might be -1, -2, -2.2-ish, -2.2. So that right there, it's not a function. It asks, is it a function? The answer is no. It definitely fails that vertical line test, which we're gonna say in here. That's how I think of it because that's how I was taught it. But basically there are multiple outputs for the same input. There are multiple outputs for one single input. Okay, so now we're gonna kind of do this function machine idea again, or concept. It says calculate when f of -3. Remember when we have that. Remember when we have a -3 there for x, it means inside here, we're just plugging in -3 any place you see an x. So I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna use this function machine and I'm gonna plug in -3, f of -3 to my function machine. Okay, you can draw it around it if you want to. It's that concept of the function machine, right? Here and the output. But what I have in this one is I have 6 over, and now any place there's an x, I'm plugging in -3. So I have -3 minus 3. Okay, so there's my function machine, right? So my input is -3, and now I need to find my output. Well, I need to do a little math for that. So I'm gonna kind of come off to the side here. I have 6 over -3 minus 3 is -6. My output is -1. My output is -1. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing, and now I'm gonna switch this. Instead of a -3, I'm gonna make it a 0. And I'm just changing it right on here. Obviously, I should redraw a problem, but for the purposes of getting through this quickly, I'm doing it this way instead. So now I end up with 6 over 0 minus 3. Well, that's a -3. Okay. 6 over -3 is going to be -2. -2. Okay. And I'm gonna, if I plugged in 2, I'm sure you guys can see instead I plug in 2, I would get 6 over -1, I'd get a -6. Okay, so now it says calculate f of 3. What happens? That's what I'm gonna do next. So down here, I'm gonna actually do part B. This was part A that I went through. I'm gonna do part B because something unique happens that we need to talk about. When I plug in 3 instead, I get 6 over 3 minus 3. This is 6 over 0, which is like a huge math no-no. In fact, even in my cell phone calculator, I'd venture to guess that when I go 6 divided by 0, it's going to say error. Error. So that's not something we can have in math. This is an error. Well, that has me thinking, well, what does that mean? When we have a graph of this right here, in fact, I'm going to pull up a graph in Desmos so that you guys can see it, because I do think that this is important. It's important for you guys to start to visualize these. So I'm going to go to desmos.com. I'm going to type in this equation. So let me get started. I'm already signed in. So let's go to the graphing calculator. They changed the interface a tiny bit. Okay, and I'm going to show you guys if I graph y equals, and then I'm going to put parentheses, 6 divided by, and then I'm going to put x minus 3. I want you to see what that looks like. It's a complicated graph that we're not going to get into yet, but we just had that when we put in 1, 2, 3, this right here, this value 3, when we put that in, we got an error. What you guys will notice is that these graphs, whether I go high or low, will never touch that value. Okay, if I zoom way out, it's never going to touch that value of 3. Okay, that's going to be called an asymptote in math. But I want you to understand that that's very important for you to know that like that right there doesn't work. So it says what happened? Well, it doesn't work. We get an error. An error. So we just found out that there are values that don't work sometimes. Okay. So in this one, it says we're going to talk about now domain and range. So for this, in domain, I would actually be saying that I can use all x values except x can't be 3. X cannot be 3. This did not work. So that's a way that we'll say domain for this one. So in this one, it says that right here. The domain of this is all x's. You can use all x's except x cannot be 3. Okay, so that's like a limit on here. We're going to be calling those. So the domain for this one, the domain would be all x values, all x's, except x cannot be 3. That's how I would say that. My range are going to be my y values. So your domain are your x values, your range are your y values. In this one, your y's can be all numbers, all y's, or all numbers. Okay, so now we're going to look at this one as well. In this one, when I ask you, and this is more likely what you guys are going to encounter for me, you're going to see a graph like this and you're going to have to talk about what x's you use, those are your domains, and which y's you use. So this is 1-54. Okay, I'm looking at this one. And again, this is going to be more likely what you have. You have a graph like this and you're going to have to tell me what your domain is and what your range is. So is this a function? That's the first thing that I'm going to ask on this one. Is this a function? Well, yes. For every single x, there's only one y. There's only one y. Okay, that's the first thing I would say. And then we talk about for domain, we always say our x values. I always think of, because we're going to be always talking about domain and range, x comes before y, d comes before r. Domain is always your x values. So the domain is what x values do I use? Well, there's a closed circle here, which means I actually use that value right there. I use all x's from -2, okay, all the way to, and I'm going to put less than or equal to because I use the 2. I use them from -2 all the way over here. Again, I'm looking at x values all the way to 4. And 4 is included because this is a closed circle. If this was an open circle, you would not put the equal sign because you don't actually use 4. But I use all x's from -2 to 4 on this graph, -2 to 4. Now let's talk about the y's that we use. Okay, it looks like my y value. I just slide up and down that y-axis. My lowest y looks like it's right there, which would be at -1. So my range, again, my range are my y values. I use from -1 is less than or equal to y, because remember, these are my y's, range is always y, which is less than or equal to, it looks like my highest y is right there, which would be at 1, 2, 3. That's my top y is at 3. That's how I would do the domain and range. Okay. Okay, it says here, Ricky thinks that the range is -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Is he correct? Why or why not? That's a great insight. Like, he does have them going from -1 to 3, which is correct, but he's saying that it's each individual value. But if you guys look, isn't one of the values also 1.5 right here, or 0.5? That gives me a value. That gives me a value for the graph. So this right here is not, because this is continuous, then that's not the domain and range. Okay, I'm going to talk about a couple of these because I do think it's important for you to see a couple. This is not a function. This is definitely not a function, right? It fails the vertical line test. For that input right there, I get 2 outputs. But we can still talk about domain and range. So I'm going to do 1-55. This is the last little bit that I'm going to do with you. I'm going to state the domain and the range for A. Even though it is not a function, I still can talk about the domain and range. The domain are always your x values. So it looks like this one goes to -3 all the way over to 3. All the x values that I use are from -3, which I put x is greater than -3, greater than or equal to, but less than or equal to 3. Okay, I use all x's from -3 to 3. Now talking about my y's, my lowest y, it looks like is -3 as well. -3 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to, what's my top y? Well, it looks like it is also 3. That would be the domain and range for A. Ooh, I love lines. Lines make it tricky. In B, my domain for that line, a domain for the line. What x values do I use? Well, here's the thing. Do you guys see the little arrows on either side? That means it goes on and on forever. So I actually don't, like, who knows? I could use x's all the way over here because the line keeps going and going forever. So in this scenario, when you have a line, I can use all x's because this arrow goes over here. So if I plugged in 11, I would have a value here. So this, we actually say all real numbers. All real numbers is what we say. And same with the range. The range is the same way. It's actually all real numbers too. I would also be okay, because we haven't talked about numbers that aren't real. You can just put all numbers will work. All numbers. Everything works for a line. But the last one we're going to look at, actually, I'll probably do D as well, just so, to give you a little bit more. But the domain for C is a segment. You guys will notice that segment right there. It starts, or it stops right there. Then I have to figure out, well, what's my domain? What x values do I use? It looks like this one goes to -1, -2. -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to, my maximum x value is right there at 4, So you guys will notice I'm sliding along my x-axis to figure that out. Now for my range, I'm dealing with my y values. It looks like it goes all the way down to -4 on the y-axis. -4 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to, and I go all the way up to here. It looks like it maxes out right there, which is at 1, 2, +2, +2. Okay. The last one I'm going to do is actually D right here, this one. In D, I'm going to come up here to do it. In D, I have, what X's do I use? Well, you'll notice those arrows. Those arrows keep going down. I don't know what X is. Like, it doesn't end here at -4 because it's not a solid dot. It keeps going. So it could keep going and going and going and going. Same with on this end, it could keep going and going and going. So on my X's, I actually use, so for my domain, I would put all numbers. Okay, all numbers work there. But my range is a little bit different. Okay, so my range are what Y values do I use? Well, these are going all the way down, all the way down. So it actually goes all the way here to what I would call infinity. So for my range, I'm gonna actually put, and people sometimes will put negative infinity, okay? I'll do that, negative infinity, right? All the way up, but it does here on my Y, it stops right there at 4, at Y equals 4. So is less than or equal to Y, which is less than or equal to 4. The other way to write this, if you don't like the whole infinity thing, is you can put all Y's less than or equal to 4. That's the other way that you can say it. Like all Y values that are less than 4. That's another way to say it. You do not need to do the infinity if you don't like to think of it that way, as going to negative infinity. You can just say, well, the maximum value here is 4, so it's all Y's less than or equal to 4. Okay, and that's all. Today you guys will practice some of that domain and range. So for all of these graphs right here, you're looking at them and talking about the domain and range. When you see those arrows on the end, that's when you have to think about, okay, the graph goes on and on. So please think about that. Oh, that is interesting. Do you guys notice this right here? I just caught this. These are actually the same exact problem. These are the same exact problem. So I'll go ahead and take those off right now so that you only actually have 2 problems that you're practicing tonight. Okay, good luck, guys. I will be posting the answers, so please check the answers for your homework if you are struggling at all. And if you need any help, please reach out to me.